the horsemen who dominated the American plains for more than 150 years. Wyoming, 1680. A group of hunters dragged their belongings across the frozen ground using wooden sleds pulled by dogs. They had no wheels, no horses, no permanent settlements. They were the Eastern Shoshone, a people so overlooked by history that even their neighbors barely noticed them. But something was about to happen 1,000 miles to the south that would change everything. And these forgotten hunters would become the most feared warriors on the North American continent. In 1680, the Pueblo people of New Mexico rose up against Spanish colonial rule in what became known as the Pueblo Revolt. The Spanish were driven out of Santa Fe for 12 years, and when they fled, they left behind something that would reshape an entire civilization. Approximately 1,500 to 2,000 horses. Those horses entered the intertribal trade networks of the American Southwest. They moved north through the hands of dozens of nations, trading post by trading post, canyon by canyon. By the 1690s, horses had reached the Colorado and Wyoming highlands, where the Eastern Shoshone lived. A small group within the Shoshone began to separate. They moved southeast, following the expanding buffalo herds that were thriving in a period of wetter climate on the southern plains. Within a single generation, less than 20 years, these former pedestrian hunters had become something entirely new. In 1706, Spanish records from Santa Fe mentioned them for the first time. The document described groups of Utes and an unfamiliar people arriving near the settlement, armed, mounted, and ready for combat. The Spanish called them Comanches, a corruption of the Ute word Comanche, meaning those who are against us. Their own name for themselves was simpler, Numunu, the people. How did a small band of dog sled hunters become the dominant military power of an entire continent? How fast did this transformation really happen? And what exactly made them so different from every other nation that had obtained the horse before them? The answers begin in the next chapter. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support, and let's continue. Comanches seize southern plains. Expel Apache nations. Texas, 1724. A battle lasted 9 days. Spanish colonial records described the fighting as relentless, the terrain brutal, a deep canyon somewhere in the southern plains that the governor referred to as La Gran Sierra del Fierro. The Apaches, who had controlled the southern plains for generations, were facing an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. The Apaches had obtained horses decades earlier. They used them for transportation and hunting. The Comanches used them as weapons platforms. The difference was decisive. By the time the Comanches arrived on the southern plains in significant numbers, approximately 1710 to 1720, the Apache nations held territory across what is now Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. They were not weak. They were experienced desert fighters with established trade networks and alliance systems. But their cavalry tactics were simply outclassed. Comanche warriors had grown up on horseback. Boys as young as 4 and 5 years old were given their own ponies. Before age 6, most rode without assistance. Their short recurved bows, made from Osage orange wood, could fire 20 arrows in the time a Spanish soldier required to reload and fire a single musket. They could shoot accurately in any direction at full gallop. The Apache could not match this combination of speed, firepower, and horsemanship. The campaigns lasted decades. One engagement after another pushed Apache bands further and further from the territory they had held. By 1760, many Apache groups had simply disappeared from the historical record of the southern plains. Some moved into the deserts of Arizona. Others were absorbed. The remainder fled south into Mexico. The land they left behind, approximately 240,000 square miles of grassland, canyon country, and river valleys, was now Comanche territory, an empire larger than the entire nation of France, and had been won entirely on horseback. Comancheria Empire surpasses France in total size. Oklahoma, 1780. A Comanche chief rode across grassland that stretched to every horizon without a single landmark built by European hands. The territory beneath his horse's hooves extended from the Texas Hill Country in the south to the Arkansas River in the north, from the Pecos River in the west to the Cross Timbers Forest in the east. The Spanish had a name for all of it. They called it La Comancheria. It covered approximately 240,000 square miles. The entire nation of France covers 248,000 square miles. Every colonial power in North America, north of the Rio Grande, controlled less land than the Comanches at their peak. Population estimates for the Comanches at this period range between 20,000 and 40,000 people, a remarkable number for a nomadic people on the plains. When they had separated from the Shoshone roughly 60 years earlier, their population was estimated at approximately 5,000. The increase came from three sources: the extraordinary abundance of buffalo on the southern plains, the systematic adoption of captives into Comanche society, and immigration from other Shoshone groups who followed them south. By 1823, Eastern Comanche bands alone were estimated to have approximately 2,500 captives living among them. Most adopted fully into Comanche families and culture. The Comanche language became the lingua franca of the entire southern plains. Any trader, any diplomat, any warrior from another nation who wanted to conduct business in this territory needed to speak Comanche. No other indigenous language in North America held that kind of commercial and diplomatic authority over such a large area. The average Comanche warrior owned 10 to 15 horses. Senior chiefs maintained herds of several hundred. Horses were the measure of wealth, the engine of the economy, and the foundation of military power. The Comanches had become the largest horse breeders and traders on the continent, and no one, Spanish, Mexican, Texan, or American, had yet found a way to stop them. Spanish forces signed peace, recognized Comanche sovereignty. New Mexico, 1786. The governor of New Mexico sat across from Comanche representatives and signed an agreement that his predecessors would have considered unthinkable. The Spanish crown, which had spent 70 years trying to subjugate, convert, or eliminate the Comanches, was formally recognizing them as a sovereign nation with the right to trade, travel, and govern their own territory. It had taken an extraordinary amount of blood to reach that table. In 1716, a Spanish governor attacked a peaceful Ute and Comanche encampment near San Antonio Mountain, killing and enslaving many of its inhabitants. The raids that followed in retaliation lasted for years. In 1747, a combined force of more than 500 Spanish soldiers and Pueblo warriors attacked a Comanche camp near the Rio Chama, killing 107 people and capturing 206. In 1774, 600 soldiers surrounded a Comanche band and killed 300 men, women, and children. Each Spanish military campaign produced temporary disruption. None produced lasting control. In 1779, Governor Juan Bautista de Anza of New Mexico led a deep strike into Comanche territory and killed the prominent war chief Cuerno Verde, Greenhorn, in direct combat near Greenhorn Mountain in present-day Colorado. It was one of the few unambiguous Spanish military victories in nearly a century of conflict. But it was not enough to break the Comanches. It was, however, enough to begin negotiations. The 1786 agreement gave the Comanches formal trade rights in New Mexico. In return, they halted raids on New Mexican settlements. It was a practical arrangement built entirely on mutual recognition of military reality. The Spanish were not strong enough to destroy the Comanches. The Comanches had no interest in occupying Spanish cities. What the agreement did not cover was Texas, and the raids into Texas, and later into independent Mexico, would continue for another 60 years. Fort Parker raid, Cynthia Ann Parker captured. Texas, May 19, 1836. The Republic of Texas was exactly 43 days old. The ink on the Declaration of Independence from Mexico was barely dry, and on a wooden stockade in what is now Limestone County, Texas, a column of several hundred Comanche, Kiowa, and allied warriors appeared at the gate just after sunrise. The men inside Fort Parker made the fatal mistake of opening the gate to negotiate. Within minutes, 5 men were dead. The warriors entered the compound and took 5 captives, 2 women and 3 children. Among them was a girl approximately 9 years old named Cynthia Ann Parker. She would not return to white society for 24 years. Cynthia Ann was taken north into the heart of Comancheria. She learned the Comanche language completely. She forgot English. She became a skilled buffalo hunter and processor, mastering the physical demands of nomadic plains life. She married a Noconi Comanche leader named Pita Nocona. They had 3 children, a daughter named Topsana, Prairie Flower, and 2 sons, Pecos and Quana. In December of 1860, Texas Rangers attacked a Comanche camp on the Pease River in what became known as the Battle of Pease River. Several Comanches were killed. A woman carrying a small child was captured. She was approximately 33 years old, with blue eyes and sun-darkened skin. She said her name was Nadua. Her uncle, Isaac Parker, identified her as his niece, Cynthia Ann. She was returned to white society against her will. She tried to escape multiple times. She never adapted. Her daughter, Prairie Flower, died of illness within a few years. Cynthia Ann Parker died approximately 1870, of grief, in the estimation of those who knew her. Her son, Quana, was still free, somewhere on the Llano Estacado, and he was becoming something his enemies would have to reckon with. Medicine Lodge. Treaty promises land, betrayal follows. Kansas, October 1867. On the banks of Medicine Lodge Creek, representatives of the Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Kiowa Apache nations sat across from United States government commissioners on flat Kansas grassland. The government offered a specific deal: surrender approximately 60,000 square miles of traditional territory. In exchange, receive designated reservation lands in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, along with annual supplies, schools, churches, and a written guarantee. That guarantee was explicit. The United States government promised, in the treaty text, to prevent non-Indian hunters from entering the tribal hunting grounds south of the Arkansas River. Some Comanche leaders signed. The Quahati Band, the most isolated, most independent, and most militarily active Comanche group, living on the Llano Estacado of the Texas Panhandle, never signed. They had never signed any treaty with the United States or with Texas. They would not start now. For approximately 5 years, the provisions of the treaty existed on paper. Then, in 1872, professional buffalo hunters, operating out of Dodge City, Kansas, had exhausted the herds on the northern plains. They looked south. The Cheyenne and Arapaho hunting grounds were stripped within months. By 1873, the hunters crossed into the Texas Panhandle. Directly into the territory the Medicine Lodge Treaty had specifically promised to protect. The United States government did nothing to stop them. A skilled hunter with a Sharps rifle could kill 100 to 150 buffalo in a single day. The hides were sold to eastern industrial markets for commercial leather, The carcasses were left to rot across hundreds of miles of plains. The Comanches watched their food supply disappear. Their trade economy collapsed. Their ability to sustain families through winter depended entirely on dried buffalo meat and buffalo hide teepees. Without the buffalo, there was no Comanche way of life. Someone had decided that was acceptable. 700 warriors charge Adobe Walls fortification. Texas Panhandle, June 27, 1874. Before dawn, approximately 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Arapaho warriors gathered on the plains north of the Canadian River. Their target was a small cluster of buffalo hunting camps called Adobe Walls, a trading post that had been established earlier that year in direct violation of the Medicine Lodge Treaty. The camp held 28 men and 1 woman. A Comanche medicine man named Isatai had spent months recruiting warriors for this offensive. He told them he possessed supernatural power, that his medicine would make them invulnerable to bullets. He promised that the hunters inside Adobe Walls would be asleep when the warriors arrived. A young war leader named Quanah Parker helped organize the assault. It was to be the opening strike of a campaign to drive the hunters permanently from the plains. At dawn, the charge began. The 28 defenders were not asleep. They were awake. Some reports say a rifle accidentally discharged inside one of the buildings moments before the attack, waking everyone. They reached their weapons, and those weapons were Sharp's rifles, caliber .50, heavy-barreled, single-shot guns capable of accurate fire at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. The warriors charged across open ground. The defenders fired from behind thick adobe and wood walls. Comanche cavalry, perhaps the finest light cavalry the world had produced, was riding in a straight line toward men with rifles that could kill at a quarter mile. The charge failed. Quanah Parker had his horse shot from under him at approximately 500 meters. A ricocheting bullet struck him in the shoulder. The attack was broken up with significant casualties. On the third day of the standoff, Hunter Billy Dixon fired a single Sharps round at a group of warriors on a distant bluff. The shot killed one at a measured distance of over 1,500 meters. The warriors withdrew. Isatai's prophecy had failed. The summer was not over. Mackenzie destroys Palo Duro Canyon, winter refuge. Texas Panhandle, September 28, 1874. Colonel Ranald Slidell Mackenzie stood at the rim of a crack in the earth that was almost invisible until you were standing on its edge. The Palo Duro Canyon dropped 700 feet straight down from the surrounding flat plains, a hidden world of red rock walls, juniper trees, and a small river at the bottom. Inside it, spread across miles of canyon floor, were the winter camps of the Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne nations. Thousands of people, hundreds of teepees, enough dried meat and stored supplies to survive 6 months. The United States Army had been searching for this place since August. General Philip Sheridan had organized a 5-column campaign in the summer of 1874, sending cavalry units converging on the Texas Panhandle from 5 different directions simultaneously. The goal was not to win a single battle. It was to prevent the Comanches from ever resting, ever eating, ever stopping long enough to regroup. This strategy, relentless pursuit into their own territory, was something entirely new. Mackenzie's scouts found the trail leading into the canyon on the evening of September 27th. At first light on the 28th, the 4th Cavalry descended the canyon walls in single file. The warriors fought to cover the escape of women and children. Casualties were relatively low. The battle itself was brief. But what happened next was decisive. Mackenzie burned more than 450 villages. He destroyed every ton of stored winter food. He captured approximately 1,400 to 2,000 horses and ordered the vast majority slaughtered. The carcasses of the horses covered the canyon floor. Without horses, the Comanches could not hunt. Without food stores, they could not survive winter. Groups of families, cold, starving, and on foot, began walking toward Fort Sill, Indian Territory. One by one, family by family. The empire was ending. Quanah Parker surrenders. Last free Comanches fall. Fort Sill, Indian Territory, June 2nd, 1875. A column of riders approached the fort through the Oklahoma heat. There were approximately 700 of them, the last free Comanche band on the North American continent. At their front rode a man in his early 20s, half Comanche and half Texan by blood, entirely Comanche by upbringing, language, and identity. His name was Quanah Parker. He had been born approximately 1852, the son of the Noconi war leader Peta Nocona and the Texas captive Cynthia Ann Parker. When his mother was recaptured by Texas Rangers in 1860, Quanah was approximately 8 years old. He was raised by other Comanche warriors and eventually joined the Quahati Band, the group that had never signed a single treaty and never submitted to any reservation. He had led the assault at Adobe Walls. He had fought through the Red River War of 1874. After Palo Duro Canyon, with no horses and no food, his band had continued resisting for 8 more months. There was simply nothing left to fight with. On June 2nd, Quanah Parker surrendered to Colonel Mackenzie at Fort Sill. The armed resistance of the Comanches was over. What happened next surprised everyone. Quanah Parker adapted. He learned English and Spanish. He became a cattle rancher, leasing grazing rights on Comanche lands to Texas ranchers, including Charles Goodnight and the Burnett family, generating income for his people. He traveled to Washington and met President Theodore Roosevelt. He rode in Roosevelt's inaugural parade in 1905 alongside other tribal leaders. He died on February 23, 1911, at his home near Cache, Oklahoma. A man who had fought the United States Army and then learned to operate within its legal and commercial systems. He is buried at Fort Sill Post Cemetery beside his mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, and his father, Peta Nocona. 3 people from 3 worlds, one family, one of the most extraordinary stories the American West ever produced. Mackenzie destroys Palo Duro Canyon Winter Refuge, Great Plains, 1875. In 1800, naturalists estimated between 30 and 60 million bison roamed the North American continent. By 1889, fewer than 1,000 remained. The near total elimination of the American bison, accomplished in less than 20 years, was the most consequential act of environmental destruction in the history of the Western Hemisphere. And it was not an accident. Buffalo hides had industrial value. Eastern tanneries converted them into machine belts for the factories of the Industrial Revolution. A skilled hunter with a Sharps 50 caliber rifle could kill 100 to 150 animals per day from a fixed position. The bison would not run if the shooters stayed downwind and fired steadily. The dead animals were skinned on sight, and the carcasses left to decompose across hundreds of miles of plains. General Philip Sheridan, commander of the Army's Southwestern Department, understood exactly what was happening and what it meant militarily. He stated publicly that the hide hunters had done more to resolve the conflict with indigenous Plains nations in 2 years than the Army had accomplished in 30. He urged Congress to give every hunter a medal. For the Comanches, the buffalo was not merely food, it was infrastructure. Buffalo hides built and insulated teepees. Sinew from buffalo tendons strung the boughs that defined Comanche military power. Buffalo fat preserved dried meat through winter. Buffalo's stomach lining served as water containers. Buffalo dung, dried, was the primary fuel source on a treeless plain. The elimination of the buffalo was the elimination of the entire economic and material foundation of Comanche civilization simultaneously. By 1885, 10 years after Quanah Parker's surrender, the Comanche population had fallen from an estimated 20,000 to approximately 1,500. Disease, starvation on insufficient government rations, and cultural collapse accelerated the decline. The Comanche Nation today has approximately 17,000 enrolled members. Most live in southwestern Oklahoma. The language is spoken fluently by less than 1% of the population, almost exclusively elderly speakers. Revitalization efforts continue. The people endure.